And we're live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Faith and Works. This is a monthly program of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Essex County. And this is a program where we invite special guests to share their stories of their work and their commitment and their challenges sometimes. So we are looking forward to hearing from Kate Dodd this afternoon. Before we start, I'm just going to light the chalice with a match. Come into this circle of love and justice. Come into the community of mercy, holiness, and health. Come, and you shall know peace and joy. So I just wanted to welcome all of you here. I want to welcome the people who are here, and who are here on screen. Nice to see everybody. And welcome, of course, Kate Dodd. Also, I just wanted to note that the three organizations that are represented here, the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Essex County, the Hub, and the University of Orange, are organizations that are committed and devoted to the mission of supporting and nurturing life in the city of Orange. So it's very appropriate that Kate is our guest because Kate lives in Orange. And she has been living in Essex County and the Oranges and New Jersey and the New York area for many years. What else did I want to say? Oh yes, this was the other thing I wanted to say, is that if you have been around the Oranges for a while, you have probably seen Kate's work just by walking or strolling or just being in the right place. If you have ridden the light rail of New Jersey Transit in Newark, if you noticed some very strange looking gas lights in South Orange a few years ago, I think right now there are some very funny looking tall structures at the corner of Hillside and Orange that are not trees, but are quite beautiful. So Kate's work is all around us. And it's out there to be seen just by walking and getting out into the community. So I want to say a few things about Kate. I'll be brief. Kate was born in Berkeley, California in 1960, which I think is kind of like being born in Boston in 1776 or Paris in 1907. It's where the revolution began and where Kate began, very appropriate. Because if the purpose of a revolution is to challenge our conventional thinking and to look at the embedded power structures that surround us, that is very much what you have been doing for quite a while. So I was thinking that was a very nice connection. Kate's work has been widely recognized for its excellence. Her work has been exhibited nationally in museums, galleries, and shows everywhere. She has done multiple residencies, including at the MacDowell Colony. She received a prestigious New Jersey State Council on the Arts Individual Artist Grant in 2020. So her work celebrates the transformation of ordinary materials and the hidden patterns of human habits. So I think that's enough from me. Take it away, Kate.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that was a great introduction, Darcy. Thank you. That was really nice. And like to have revolution applied to me, it's like very thrilling. I don't know if I do that. That's one of the questions we can look at today when we look at my work, but thank you for that. And thank you to the church and to the two other organizations for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been in this building before. It's a lovely, beautiful building, and it's in a town that clearly I feel connected to at this point. from living in it and having lived around it as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically how I came to where I am in my work. But where I am in my work is at this moment posing a question that I've not yet been able to answer. And so I'm going to present you with that question, just in case you have some thoughts on what the answer might be. That basically, as my screen says here, I'm exploring the innate contradictions of being an artist who does work about consumption and waste. And yet I'll just give you I'll give you the conclusion of the talk right now in case you decide to tune out. That my work actually, while it's about critiquing consumption and waste, it is very, very much a part of my work is to consume and to produce waste. And so that is the conundrum that I am facing as I decide where I want to go next in my work. Okay, so thanks, Dodd. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the very beginning, but I'm going to speed through things so that you get a sense of why did I even end up having this problem in the first place? Why and how did I invent my own problem? It came really out of the love of transforming materials, and of being able to transform materials. And so what I'm showing you on the first slide here is a few of the things that inspired me from the very beginning. And if you start at the top left-hand side, I always have trouble doing my right and left, so forgive me if I get it wrong. You can see that there is a nifty little cap for some shampoo, and then right next to it is a container for dental floss. And yet when you put them together, you magically have a highly designed toilet in miniature form. So I had a dollhouse. I love making things for my dollhouse. This was great to simply be handed the plumbing for my dollhouse, and that it was magic that it came from something else and that I could see it on two different scales. I love the magazine. It was very popular in California in the 60s and 70s, Sunset Magazine, because every issue was about something that you could make out of something else that was not meant for that original purpose. I loved reading the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, even though they are no longer held in the same regard they once were because of a lot of the racist content that has been kind of acknowledged finally. But nevertheless, when I was reading them before that moment happened, one of the things that I loved about those books was that it was all about a family that made something out of nothing. Now, that's not totally true. They did take other people's land and things like that, but they were able to use like every part of a pig when they slaughtered it and that kind of thing. And then down here, we have myself and my sister, and I'll let you guess which one is which. Let's just say she was a better swimmer than I was. So that's why I have a large styrofoam pellet on my back in case I drowned in the mud. But we're very busy making something, which was what we did all the time, 15 months. Yeah, and she's actually an artist too.
Okay.
And not only is she an artist, she makes quilts. And so long ago, one of the things I did was take all of the scraps that I made in a batik class and turned it into a quilt. So I've always had this kind of compulsion for taking whatever is around me and turning it into something else. And it comes from this just kind of this love of materials and being able to change materials and see them in different ways. So with that in mind, I went off to art school in Big Bad, New York City. Coming from California to New York was a shock. On the other hand, I felt I'd grown up, as Darcy alluded to, in the center of the universe. And yet I was sure there might be another center. And so someone suggested New York, and I went to look and see if it could compete. And it certainly could. What you see here is me in the ceramics studio at Pratt Institute in about 1983. And to the left of, on the left side of the screen is one of the final ceramic sculptures that I made for my bachelor's show there, which is, it's about 16, is it that big? Yeah, it's about 12, I guess it may be 12 feet by 12 feet by about 8 feet tall. So I was into working big with clay. Now, coming from the Bay Area, what I was used to was a very beautiful setting that has less now than it did, but so many natural places to go and be outdoors and absorb all the different features of the landscape. And when I got to Bed-Stuy in 1978, where Pratt is, it had not been gentrified yet, and it was not only was it a rough neighborhood, but it was also the 70s in New York, and so everything was looking a little down and out. And I was comparing this place I had come from to this place where I now lived, and seeing the first cockroach that I ever saw and all of those kinds of experiences. And of course I missed the landscape in California, but it kind of gave me a raison d'etre, because immediately it became clear that the place that I was now in needed beauty in a way that California did not need, and that maybe I could provide some of it. So that's partly how I got involved in investigating landscapes, building into landscapes. It was all about kind of missing that landscape of California and recreating a landscape here that had some of the same senses of protection and intimacy and beauty that I had enjoyed growing up. This was a funny magazine. It was put out by Kimberly-Clark. You may recognize that name as one of the major producers of tampons. And so they decided that if they put a promotional magazine out that showed young women who used tampons doing other things besides using tampons, maybe they could sell more tampons. So that's what that's about.
Brilliant.
All right, so I stayed in New York. I really liked New York. I liked the challenge of it. And eventually I decided, after working for quite a few years, that I would go to graduate school. When I went to graduate school I started in '88. So the 1980s in New York, very different than the 1970s in New York. But one of the major differences that I was very aware of was the change in the way the art world and the art market operated. And the 80s was this boom time for buying art as some kind of investment that you could make a lot of money off of. And that, while that is something that has always been done, it was done in a different way. It was done as something equivalent to, say, buying stocks or something like that. And the auction houses were selling work for much higher prices, and painters and sculptors who were, if you think of something like the Mary Boone Gallery that used to be in Soho, she was bringing in artists and they were selling for just unbelievable amounts of money. So I was very aware of that environment starting graduate school, the environment of when you make art, it's something to sell, it's a commodity. And so perhaps because I came from Berkeley, I decided that I needed to go against that, and that I wanted to make things that could not be sold in any possible way. Now, there's kind of an ulterior motive to that, because really, if I can't sell something, then I don't have to worry about if I could sell something, right? So now that's off the table. I have a lot more freedom. And so what I started to do was build artworks that once they were built, if you were to touch them or lift them or move them or try in any way to preserve them, they would disintegrate. And one of the materials I found that was great to do that with was construction rubble, which there was plenty of around Columbia where I went. And there was also a tremendous generation of shredded documents. And so I combined the two things. And so the structures that you see here, the one higher up is encapsulating a bunch of construction rubble. The one lower down is very carefully balancing the construction rubble. And then I use the shredded paper as this kind of lacy web that wound through them. So clearly you knock it, it's going to tear apart. There's just no way to preserve it. So that was one of my answers to this issue of kind of being a maker of things that could be bought and sold. And as I continued at Columbia, I got interested not only in making things that could not be lifted up, taken somewhere and sold, but I also got interested in the idea that things couldn't be lifted up at all, that I could build into my environment, and that I could, instead of having the artwork be an object, the artwork could be something that surrounded me. And so as I was getting ready to leave, I took my studio, which looked out on 125th Street and Broadway, and here's my studio window under this beautiful big water tower. And it looked out onto the 125th Street subway station, and there was a McDonald's and a tremendous amount of traffic. And so what I decided to do was build out the window. So I created a structure so that you could walk up to the window and then sit out beyond the window, cantilevered over this, landscape of McDonald's and Subways and et cetera, et cetera. And I used a whole bunch of different techniques of kind of being in the room and looking out at the room. So cantilevering the window was one idea. Another was to put tubes where you could spy or listen to whatever went on in the backyards adjacent to the building. I took a wall and cut into it to create a ladder, and then actually chopped a hole through to the next studio so you could spy on my studio mates if you wanted to do that. And ultimately, I also brought in a tremendous amount of raked leaves and made a whole kind of upholstered environment where you could sit and watch the outside while you're sitting on the outside inside, if you followed all of that. So that was that launched me into the idea of site-specific installation, of taking materials, hopefully materials in my mind that had some relationship to the site, or maybe had been found in the site or something like that, and using them to create a place that brought out some of the personality of wherever I was building. By their very nature, they had to be temporary because no one was giving me these spaces forever. And I tried to not only acknowledge the site, but also create something that was interesting for people to be in. Sometimes it was a path that people walked through. In this case, it was a number of seats that people could sit in or look out from, or that kind of thing. But that launched me with this idea of, oh, my work is going to be connected to a place. It's not going to be really an object anymore. And one of the things about that, because it's temporary, is I realized pretty quickly, this is an event more than it is an object. And if it's an event, in some ways, it might draw people to come to see it and value it more because it's time-based and it's only going to be here now and then it's going to be gone, as opposed to, oh, well, I missed that show, but I'll see the work someday when it's shown somewhere else, kind of an idea. Go ahead. And by the way, this is a small, informal group. At any time, feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, say go back, say what do you mean, any of that, totally fine. But continuing with this idea that I wanted to build in relationship to sites, when I did go to MacDowell in New Hampshire, which is an awesome experience. It's kind of like summer camp for artists, and they bring you a picnic lunch every day and they give you a studio and you just cannot believe you're being treated that way. And my particular studio was at the top of a long sweeping field, and the field had very high grass in it. It was a stunning location. And I checked with the administrators and asked if I could build something in the field, and that was fine. And then I went about looking for what materials felt like they belonged to the site. And one of the materials I found that's very plentiful in rural New Hampshire are old screens for windows. So I got a whole bunch of those, and I put together this structure down in the field. Now, to get down to the center of the field through all of this tall grass, and I would say this was before Lyme disease was really quite the hysterical thing that it is now. I discovered that if I took the grass and I braided it, that it would separate like cornrows between braids. And then I could have, the flowers would continue to bloom. I hadn't like cut down the plants or anything like that, but then I had this blooming pathway that was like walking on someone's head a little bit. So, and I also like the idea of how futile and crazy it seemed to do that. I think I was reading Charlotte Perkins' Yellow Wallpaper at that point and thinking about women who, are locked up and see things and make things that don't make any sense and that kind of thing. Anyway, I had almost completed this and was getting ready to invite people to come have kind of an evening picnic in this structure where there were seats at different levels, so you got to experience kind of being down in the grass, being right at the level of the grass, or being high up swinging over the grass. And so it was the last day before people were going to come over, and I got to my studio that morning and I heard this horrible loud truck sound, and I looked out and there was a huge tractor, and he'd been going circling around my piece, mowing the grass down. And not only was he mowing the grass down, he was really mad, and he got out and he started yelling and screaming at me. And it turned out that while the hill belonged to the place where I was in residence. The actual grass belonged to him, and he was harvesting it for hay. And as far as he was concerned, I'd wrecked his crop, and that the braids were going to gum up his blades, and that thing was just going to be in the way, period. And he just was fit to be tied. So that was upsetting. I certainly didn't want to do that to him, and that was just the beginning of finding out what is it like to make art in places that are not places for art. What is it like to make art in places that other people feel some kind of claim to? What is the nature just of territory and who has a stake in it and what kind of stake they have? It introduces very complicated but very interesting world to me. So that, I managed to salvage a photograph, but that was the end of that. I apologized. And then we went on to the next slide and the next catastrophe. There were others. There was, I don't think I put in a picture here, but I did a trail that you could follow at Snug Harbor, which is now a museum, but used to be a retirement home for sailors on Staten Island. And it's beautiful, like Beaux-Arts buildings and fields. And I made this long trail going through the whole thing. And some of the trail involved putting some paper mache in the crevices of trees. And then the botanical gardens decided that I desecrated the trees, and they got out an arborist, and the arborist said, you're gonna have to take everything down, you're ruining the trees. It was paper mache in the crevice of bark, of an invasive species, no less. So it was not gonna hurt any tree. But so, in other words, I was collecting these war stories. This was not so much a war story as it was a revelation for me. I was invited to go to an island in the middle of Boston Harbor, and there was an organization that put together this very odd residency where they invited, I think there were 10 artists, and we were invited to come for 5 days. We had to bring all of our supplies with us, including food and water. And the idea was that we were gonna kind of reenact the Homesteading Act of 1862, which is bizarre, but with the idea that we were gonna claim part of the island and do something with it artistically for that 5-day period of time. And what was hilarious about this situation was it just naturally, the different artists immediately fulfilled the different kind of stereotypical roles in society. So there were artists that came and cooked for everyone, and their meal was their artwork. And there were some artists who came and were archaeologists and went through the island looking for various things. There was a group of artists that came as pirates, and they went around stealing everyone else's artwork. And there, of course, there was someone who came to start a cult. So we had that covered as well. And I guess I was the realtor of the island because my whole idea was, since this was about claiming land, that I actually would take surveyor's tape, which is what this pink plastic ribbon is, and that I would try to claim a lot of the island. And the part of the island that I decided I wanted to claim was the intertidal zone, because this island was 60 acres when it's at low tide and 30 acres when it's at high tide. So it decreased by half, and I thought I'd take that part that kept going away and coming back over and over again. And so I went around the entire island here, and as frequently as I could, I tied surveyor's tape onto the rocks on the shore, so that eventually, I don't know if I have another picture. Let's see if I do. Yes, eventually the entire shore had this pink hue because I had claimed it all. But when high tide came, then all of the pink was underwater. You can kind of make it out here. But at the end of every strand, I put what I thought of as kind of a fake Post-it, a little yellow rectangle. And they were made of foam, and so they would float. And each one of the Post-its, since I was so involved in claiming the land, I thought, well, what has a claim on me? And so I decided that on every Post-it, I would write the name of someone that I knew from my life. And I tried to think of every single person I'd ever known in my life and acknowledge, that they've had a place in my life. Now, this was all temporary. This was not going to stay here. But when the park ranger came around and saw this plastic, of course, their reaction was, "You're polluting our ocean." And, I explained, no, I'm putting everything here and I'm taking everything back, and it's a leave no trace project, and et cetera, et cetera. But something hit me at that moment that, wow, this plastic, here I'm talking about claiming land and what has a claim on me, but this plastic has a claim. And this plastic has the claim of creating a new landmass and displacing other ones. And it turns out, and I maybe have a slide of this, I'm not sure. No, we'll go back. Sorry. I thought I might have a slide of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, because at the time that I was doing this, that was becoming something that was in the news all the time. And so it clicked to me that plastic was making this claim, was taking this chunk of our lives, world, et cetera, and establishing itself as something that we had to either compete with or accommodate or somehow have a relationship with. But it was no longer a completely dispersed, we'll recycle it and it'll go away and it'll all be okay kind of thing. It presented itself to me as, this is a solid object kind of a situation. Okay, you could go ahead. So I started to work a lot more with plastic and got very interested in what could be recycled and what couldn't be recycled. And one of the plastics that has always been the most difficult to recycle and is almost never recycled is styrofoam, or EPS, expanded polystyrene. And so when I was invited to create an installation in it's a great gallery in Jersey City that was, it was a convent, and there were 9 little tiny bedrooms for the nuns. And the nuns no longer lived there, but the church still had this building with these little rooms, and so it was turned into a gallery, and every artist would be given a room that they could do something in. So here I am, a site-specific artist looking for places where I can put stuff. That's perfect for me. So I decided to fill this room with styrofoam as if it was kind of a floating sea, and I filled the windows, and the way light comes through styrofoam, it's quite beautiful, and it's a horrible, beautiful material, which so much plastic is. And yet you could walk into the room between the styrofoam, but it was kind of that same idea as what I was doing with the lacy paper stuff in graduate school of, if you touched it, it could move or it could break or what have you. Now, one of the things about using the styrofoam, it was made by the Dodd company, which has probably made every styrofoam coffee cup you ever bit your teeth into. The Dodd company said, because I looked up about recycling on their website, that they would accept any styrofoam that they sold back to be recycled. So when I was done with the installation, I took the whole thing and I shoved it into several boxes, and I mailed it to Dodd, and with a letter explaining, here you are, thank you, for the use of this. And I never heard from them. You know where those boxes went, right? Yeah, okay. You can go ahead, Doug. Okay. So continuing with recycling, what can't be recycled. There's the problem of cheap plastic toys, right, that have multiple materials, so you can't just put them in the plastic bin or in the metal bin or what have you. And if you go drive around on heavy pickup garbage day, you almost always will find these ride-on vehicles. And they're not just ride-on vehicles. In addition, there's miniature lawnmowers, and there's miniature golf caddies, and miniature supermarket carts, and of course there's baby strollers, and everything that could be on wheels has been turned into a cheap plastic toy that brings great pleasure to someone for about 5 minutes, maybe longer if you're lucky, or if you have kids who are a little bit more willing to get into stuff. But and then its life is over. And so I started to think about I was always thinking about, what is the future going to be like? What is the future going to be like for my kids, for my grandkids, for all of our kids? And I was thinking, well, I guess because we keep producing these plastic toys, they're going to have to go somewhere. And eventually that somewhere is going to be here with us. So we might as well turn them into a park. And so I took all of these ride-on toys and I covered them with images of lawn, so that they kind of were half park, half not park, with the idea that this is the future. This is kind of what we're presenting, and at the same time, we're encouraging all these kids to use all these vehicles. And how do we fuel vehicles? Well, obviously we use fossil fuels, or we do so far anyway. So it seemed like there was a critique I wanted to make there of what we're encouraging children to love at the same time. You could go ahead. All right, so now we do get into a little bit of home turf. These are both images from South Orange. The South Orange pool over here, and some light fixtures, the existing light fixtures that you might be familiar with if you've driven around there, and then a light fixture, it's a little hard to see with the Zoom screen there, but that I made over here. And in both cases, and maybe you can move it, I don't know. And there might even be another picture, I can't remember. We can go ahead and see if there is, just so I know. Yeah, there, okay. So now you can, do you mind going back, Doug? Sorry to give you the runaround. All right, so in both of these situations, I was using plastic in a way that maybe was attractive or beautiful to some people, but also was somewhat confrontational. So for instance, here's a typical lane division in the South Orange pool, and all of this is plastic foam, and I kind of created this floating lacy mat that you could consider it attractive, but at the same time, it was meant to evoke things like algae blooms on water, and trash being thrown in water so that you can't swim through it, and that kind of thing, of just this kind of insidious growth that the use of plastic has in it. I was doing a number of pieces at that point where I realized, well, there was a lot of talk about ocean levels rising. More talk, I think, than there is now. You know, it was more kind of, oh, that's what climate change is going to be, is ocean levels rising. So I thought, oh, there's going to be more water surface eventually. I might as well make things that can go on water, because that's going to be like the new campus, the new space where there's room for me. So that was partly how I got into floating stuff. On the other hand, these iconic lamps from South Orange, which are kind of crazy and cool. I've always liked, they're very much kind of the identity of the town, or they've been used that way as a logo and that kind of thing. And I was meanwhile very familiar with the South Orange Public Works Department recycling yard, where I found there were delightful materials all the time. And so I often would show up there on the weekend, not to make a deposit, but to make a withdrawal. And in doing that and looking at the tremendous, as you can imagine, volume of plastic waste generated by just this relatively small town, I decided that I would take people's plastic waste and turn it into this iconic fixture that everyone associated with South Orange. So now you can go ahead, Doug. I made a whole series of gas lamps that were basically a soda bottle, some detergent bottle handles, some planters, some children's toys, etc. The whole thing had a solar light, so they lit up a little bit at night, and then made this kind of arcade of gas lamps going down either side of the river in downtown South Orange. So it was a playful way of kind of representing to people, here is what we're doing. Go ahead. And that kind of idea continued over on the left there. I actually took trees, I'm sure you saw this. I actually took trees on the property of the house where I lived and played around with ideas there. That particular piece kind of reminded me, I mean, this tree had beautiful limbs to it, and they were the same form as kind of a catenary curve. And so I took club soda bottles and I arranged them so that they imitated the branch pattern, but it ended up looking like the tree was having a very serious IV to sustain it. And then here, looks very small, but as big as a good sized car, was a plastic duck that I made. The story here is I was invited to do a show at the Noise Museum, which is in southern New Jersey, and it's right next to a wildlife refuge, which has a beautiful lake. And the Noise Museum originally started out as a duck decoy museum, which is one of the kind of folk arts that South Jersey is famous for. And so there was a collection of duck decoys in the museum. And so I decided that I would make a duck decoy too, but that I would do it about the use of bottled water. And I don't know if I have another scene from this one. No, you can go back. Sorry, I always forget exactly which images I have. I hope you don't mind. But basically, what I did at the Noise Museum was I had the whole installation kind of went from bottles of pristine water to the leftover bottles that come from that to the microbes that are in tap water that are not a problem for people to actually putting the plastic bottles in our water. Because what I was trying to do was talk about the idea that there's been a huge promotion by the beverage industry to buy plastic bottled water, as you cannot avoid knowing. Plastic bottles are everywhere you look, and they are basically not getting recycled. So fun recycling facts. Recycling is a dream that was not achieved, and now that people are good at sorting their trash, it's not really doing anything anymore because the plastic that we were recycling was going to China. China will no longer accept that plastic. And so that plastic then has to be disposed of by municipalities. And actually, I should have found out what orange does before I came today. I should go and find that out. Because I believe it's 10% of the world's plastic gets recycled, and everything else goes into the garbage. So what do municipalities do? They can't afford to recycle it themselves. You know, it's an issue of scale. And so often they end up burning it. And when you burn plastic, obviously it's really toxic, but beware because the plastics industry calls that chemical recycling. So chemical recycling, not a thing. Don't fall for it. And of course, the fossil fuel and plastics industries are trying to create more and more uses for plastics, especially with the threat of electric vehicles. Now a lot of fossil fuel companies are creating these ethyl cracker plants, which are plants that are made specifically to produce ethyl, which will become polyethylene water bottles and other disposable stuff that cannot be recycled. When China was recycling it, they were shredding it and using it, but they were not able to turn it back into a viable container. And for the most part, most plastics can't be reversed that way. They're kind of a one-directional issue of the way the peptide chains hold together and all of that kind of thing. So while you can kind of press it into new uses, it's not like you can just make new bottles all the time. So plastic recycling, not really a thing, not really what's going on in the world. Anyway, this duck was basically saying, okay, so you, whoever that you is out there, are concerned with drinking pure water, and this piece was entitled The Illusion of Purity. So you buy water in these pristine bottles with pictures of a little landscape on it, and you feel like you're safe and it's okay, when really, tap water in most places is has to meet much higher regulations than bottled water does. All kinds of stuff has been found in bottled water. And of course, there are lots of companies like Nestle that go and take water for free from state supplies, bottle it, and then sell it. And so there goes, you know, what the taxpayers own being sold back to them kind of thing. So lots of reasons why I was interested in pointing out that not only is bottled water bad, but ultimately where do the bottles that come from bottled water go? They end up back in the ocean, then they end up in the food chain, then they end up in us. So now we'll get off the soapbox and we can go to the next picture. But it didn't stop me from wanting to use plastic bottles. And one of the reasons is I go back to my kind of childhood love of materials. Like I see these materials, and there's so many things you can do with plastic, and it's such a cool material, and it's such an insidious, terrible material. But I still can't help but get excited by quantity of all this material that maybe I can resurrect somehow and give new meaning to. And so I did a number of pieces where I beautified the bottles by putting them in plastic netting, the kind of plastic netting that you get garlic and onions in, you know, they use for bagging produce. And I was able to create this fabulous range of colors and did several pieces based on that. This one had a life in Summit, and then it got moved to Lewis, Delaware. This piece was at Redwood Manor State Park in northwestern New Jersey. Okay, so what else is there too much of that we don't know what to do with? Books. And I had a lot of books in the house that I lived in, and then when I downsized, I had to get rid of a lot of books, and so that became my next material. And I've used books in many different ways. Here, the idea was that as you came into this room and this wall of books, the floor kind of was going to come up and swallow the books, and some of the pages were just going to go ahead and fly out the window. So I just kind of, I don't know, enlivened or gave energy to the whole process of essentially getting rid of these books, which if you've tried to get rid of books, you know it's not so easy to do. Keep go ahead. And it was a great way to go through my favorite books from childhood and pull out some of the things that I loved. And as I went through these books, there's nothing like that to make you realize, oh, this is who I am. I am what is in these books. These books have informed who I ended up being. You could go ahead. But some people don't want to know what's in books. So my former life was as a high school teacher of art and art history. That's all he knows. And one of the byproducts of that career was I ended up with quite a few very, very large dilapidated textbooks that no one wants because their bindings have dissolved or what have you. So I got an opportunity in downtown Newark. They were building a new area called Teachers Village. And there is a gallery in Newark, the Afero Gallery, and they were part of the Newark Arts Festival, and Teachers Village allowed them to put an artwork in one of the empty storefronts before any tenant moved in. So I was given this long bank of windows, nothing going on inside of the store, and I decided that I would create kind of a timeline of art history, but it was going to be a timeline that was more what my experience of teaching it over and over again was, as opposed to an exact timeline. And what I mean by that is I wanted to work with a human figure, so there's a lot of art history I was not covering, and the iconic figures that everyone learns when they take a class like that, but eventually my experience is it all gets kind of mixed and layered in my head and they all become one. It's kind of like art history hamburger. I feel like all of these things get ground up and spit out again by me year after year. And so I decided to kind of illustrate that by taking the brick that was already part of the site, because I'm still interested in responding to the site, doing site-specific work, and kind of pulling that idea of that brick across all of these windows and letting the brick dissolve and the figures emerge. And then eventually what happened is the figures started to get combined. So you may, if you look carefully, realize these things do not match, right? That these are highly different artworks that have been put together because that's what was happening in my head. Unfortunately, that is not what is most memorable about this piece. What's most memorable about this piece is what happened by putting these images in public. So this is all pre-Ron DeSantis. But upstairs from this space was a KIPP charter school. And every day while I was building this, I would be inside the empty space, putting things on the window. Parents and kids were walking to school and then walking home from school. And one day, a woman who worked for the school came down and said to me, "What are you doing?" And I explained, I'd been invited to use this space. I'm an artist, but I'm also a teacher. And so I'm using all of this imagery from what I've taught over the years, et cetera, et cetera. And she said, "But these people are naked." And I said, "That's true. That is how the human figure has been dealt with in different cultures for different reasons. And if your students would like to learn about this, I would love to come in and give a lesson." And I've taught, elementary as well as middle and high school. I can make it age appropriate and et cetera, et cetera. And she said, "Well, I think it's a problem. Parents are complaining because the parents are complaining that there's pornography in the windows." And so I asked, well, is there a particular image that's a problem? And of course, the images that were a problem were not from all of the cultures around the world, were not from cultures that were really early. They were all the Greek gods and goddesses. Why? Because those are the ones that have been idealized in the human form that we think of as, I mean, that's the basis of our standard of beauty in Western society. So of course, when someone sees one of those forms naked, if they know nothing about it, their idea is that, you know, why am I being shown this kind of thing? It was a great opportunity to educate a lot of people, and they did not give it to me. So first I said, well, look, how about she said, well, could you just cover up the genitalia? Now,
What year was this, Kate?
About 5 years ago.
It wasn't that long ago. It was longer than that, but yeah, less than 10 for sure.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
In recent memory.
yeah, in recent memory.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'll cover up the genitalia, and what I did is I shifted where the figures were so that there was always a line of mortar, you know, going right across, or wherever it needed to go. And then I heard from the gallery, and the gallery said, this is not gonna fly. People are the school is upset. You've got to take it down. And this is about 3 days before the opening. And, you know, I've been working on this and working on this and working on this. And so I started to try and negotiate to keep it up at least until the opening, because I'd invited people. I wanted people to see it. I wanted to photograph it when it was done, because when you do temporary work, that's all you have at the end of the day anyway. So that becomes highly valuable to me. And I had some other connections in Newark because I had worked on, you know, some transit projects, and so I knew some people in New Jersey Transit. I tried going through them, and they knew the landlord, and they went and asked, and the landlord said, whatever the principal says, that's what goes, because they're the people who are paying the rent here. And so then, and the gallery was told, you got to get her out of there. And I kept trying to like keep the fight going just a little longer so I could get to opening night, because it was so close. So that finally I came down about an hour before the opening, and oh, I know, I had offered, well, if the mortar isn't enough, how about I'll put something over the torso of every figure, because I thought that would be kind of funny. And what would have been really funny is if I had put a little Kip Academy t-shirt over every figure, but I wasn't gonna be that naughty. Anyway, so, and then I offered, well, just cover it, have it completely covered during school hours. And I covered all the windows with black plastic and just said, exhibit coming, will be unveiled, not to be viewed during school hours. No, that wasn't enough. They still wanted it down. And so eventually what happened is about an hour before the opening, the one of the two owners of the gallery came down and tore it down, because I wouldn't. And I have documentation of that, but I won't show it to you here. And then eventually I took this huge wad of art history, which was now beyond hamburger, you know, now it was like landfill. And you know, people were coming to the show. So I parked my car, I put my website on the car, and then I made a giant festooning wig of detritus on top, and that was the piece.
Oh, wow.
So that's what happens in New Jersey. So Florida is not the only place. All right, we can go on. But this idea of working with books, I still am very involved in. And so the idea of where do books go? As an art history teacher, I came across the word apotheosis, which means a rising up to heaven. And so I started to think about, where do books go? Do they rise up somehow? What happens to all the information in books? Is it going to just go away? Should it go away? Some of the information is terrible information, which I really got familiar with when I was using things like very old dictionaries, a set of 1920s encyclopedias. And, you know, these things are full of, this is the truth in this book. And what is the truth? Well, the truth is all kinds of things that we no longer agree with or believe in or are just or acknowledge everyone's experience, or all of those kinds of issues. So here I had kind of the book seem as if it was going to bubble up into who knows where. But I love the illustrations in these old books. They just grab me. And so they feel valuable to me in the same way that plastic bottles felt valuable to me. So I cut out every illustration. Yes?
How long did it take?
You know, I would love to be able to answer those kinds of questions, but I work a little bit at a time over a long period of time. So it's not like I could say, oh, I went in on Monday and I finished on Friday and voila. But it's slow going. Yeah, but then, you know, eventually the pandemic came, there's a lot of Zoom, no one could see what you're doing with their hands. So I was busy. Anyway, so I cut out all of the pictures, and then here's another answer to your question, is I was able to use some things twice because, and this kind of starts to bring me around to where I want to ultimately get to in this talk today, that I am trying to kind of recycle what I make as much as I can, and use it again. But there's a limit, especially when you're working with old materials that are not meant to, be reused. Did you? Yeah, no, it is intricate. It is very intricate, and not very strong, and still not very saleable. Anyway, I love that, these little encyclopedias were almost like little prayers going up to this, dissolving of the encyclopedia, which then became these columns of light, et cetera, et cetera. You could go ahead. There's a close-up where you can see where I cut away the images and then strung the images up, and then that created the light. And so when I was asked to do a piece in this kind of strange exhibit space in California, it was a kiosk, called a kiosk. It really was a vitrine, like a 12 by 12 by 12 foot glass box in this community plaza. And the local library was collected, books. They were getting rid of the books. They would have a book sale. This is kind of what every library does, but they're books that don't sell. And so then what do they do with those books? So in this piece, I created these kind of towers, like skyscrapers in a city kind of thing, out of stacked books. And then I let all of the information in the books kind of explode outwards and reconnect and mix and match. And so you had all kinds of crazy things like Curious George and Queen Elizabeth at the same time. And I guess it was a little bit like the work that got censored in terms of mixing the images together. But my thought was, this is kind of what a mind looks like that has been exposed to the world of books. That one of the great things about my childhood, and I think for any person who's been privileged enough to get to be in that world of books, is all of this stuff is flying around in your head and you don't know when and how it's going to intersect and what it will create, but it's just this fabulous kind of stockpile to work from. Can you go ahead? So I also thought of books, because I was a bookworm as a kid, in case you weren't picking up on that. I thought of books as a protection for me. Often my family would say when I was reading a book, they could not pry me out. I just was oblivious to everything. So in this case, at Seton Hall University in South Orange, they have a great gallery program with a big glass wall that you can be inside of or outside of. So inside the gallery, I made this giant kind of beehive or igloo out of books that were being thrown out. But then if you were on the outside of the gallery, you could look in, and I might have an image of this. I hope I do. Yes, where you could look into this secret little cave to inhabit, full of, again, when I think of those kind of ladder-like shapes, they're really strands of text. So I think of them as kind of the content of the books moving across the space.
Are you designing this as you go? I mean, how do you know you have enough books to do that?
I hope. I keep soliciting more.
Yeah.
I overcommit and then scramble.
Yeah.
It's a perverse form of stimulation, like walking on a tightrope, kind of.
Very cool.
But yeah, it keeps me occupied, that's for sure. You can go ahead. Okay, so working with all of these discarded materials. One of the last kind of bodies of work that I've created had to do with where my studio is, which is in East Orange. It's a really fabulous place, an old set of factory buildings that used to be run by Johnson & Johnson, called Manufacturers Village. And we have an open studio tour, here's a plug, every October. This coming year will be October 20th through 22nd, where 60 artist studios are open, and you can go through and see an endless array of stuff and have a truly great time. It's a really popular thing to do. If you haven't done it, I would encourage you to come, especially because the building has just recently been put up for sale. We don't know what the future of it is going to be. But what it has been up until now is a collection of all kinds of warehouses and small businesses and water testing companies and artists. And actually, it used to have a fair amount of porn studios there as well. And as the artists started to come in and revamp the raw spaces, the porn industry was leaving. So we've kind of elevated, depending on how you feel about the subject of porn, we've kind of, and no pun intended, but we've kind of elevated what this complex of buildings can be. And it's become this like major art destination in East Orange. There are a bunch of other kinds of businesses there though. And one business that was there up until all of a sudden, a year ago December, was the Benevolent Beauty Incorporated company, which makes packaging, well, actually, which makes cosmetics and beauty products and puts them in very high-end packaging. They all of a sudden left the premises. I think there was a flood, but they went out of business and they left unbelievable amounts of garbage behind. Now, a lot of this garbage was in this form, so not so terrible as far as yuck, but a huge quantity of stuff that had to be thrown away.
What's
right?
in the box?
So what's in the boxes? That is such a good question, Frank. Let's see what's in the boxes. Oh, that's what's in the boxes, more boxes. Basically, I saw this as kind of the beginning of an ecosystem, of an invented world, and that all of this packaging, I treated the boxes as a mountain to build on, and that all of this packaging kind of was this new kind of landscape that could grow out of this, which on the one hand was kind of fantastic and entertaining and maybe even beautiful, and on the other hand is a nightmare because it's this crawling thing that goes on and on and on and that you can't get rid of. And of course, it really points to how much throwaway there is in the beauty products industry, right? That there's such tiny product for so much packaging. It's just like a packaging monster. Go ahead. Oh, yes.
Do you use newspapers?
I certainly have, but I haven't used it like on a regular basis. And it's interesting, when I was teaching, I relied on newspapers a lot as a material. And then all of a sudden, we had no paper mache supplies because the newspapers, yeah. But are you thinking that you have many newspapers you'd like to put somewhere?
I'll just save them myself.
Because I have been gifted anonymously with piles of, Amazon bubble wrap envelopes and things like that. It's a dangerous world that I'm working in, yeah.
I've heard that in the cosmetic industry, that many times the packaging costs more than the product.
I have no trouble believing that's true. Matter of fact, if you go back for a sec, Doug, this color on the floor, this is where they mixed the lipstick. So that's all just kind of pigment that was left behind. I'm sure that's true. It's gotta be. So I have, this piece is called Boxes and Boxes and Boxes of Benevolent Beauty. And I still have a lot of boxes. So I did more with the boxes. In this case, this was for a gallery on the Upper East Side that just happened to be right above Dolce & Gabbana on Madison Avenue. And I took all of this material and built this installation where it looks like this was kind of just a nook in the gallery, but I turned it into basically a wall with the idea of this is a fantasy of what's behind the wall. It's all of the crap that something like Dolce & Gabbana encourages. And so what I did is I took lots and lots of there were all these lipstick tubes of varying kinds and put them together and lit them from below to make this kind of terrible fairyland. And I think I have another picture here. That felt like it was, I'm caught up in this idea of apotheosis all the time, or of things falling down or things rising up. So felt like all of this packaging was going to kind of rise up and go where is always the question. And then finally, there was one last stop for things, and that was I had to, of course, then take the installation down like usual, because this is a temporary installation, and some of it I kept to try and recycle. But I thought there should be one last photo shoot in the doorway of Dolce & Gabbana. before I broke it apart, shoved it in my old car, and drove away, hoping there was no lipstick tubes flying out of my windows as I went down
Wow.
Madison Avenue. So that was fun. I wish I could have left it there. That would have been even better. Well, some of it goes into a dumpster, which is
Yeah.
exactly the problem I'm talking about. And actually, if the next piece, and I think it's the last piece, I took all of these perfume boxes and created this giant wall in a show in Williamsburg. I was invited to do something. I actually sewed all these together so that if anyone went, bloop, it wouldn't fall over. Here you can get a little bit of a sense of what the actual boxes were. They were very fancy. I mean, they had, you know, stamped gold, embossed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with this piece, when it had to come down, I happened to be at my nephew's wedding and I couldn't come to take it down. And so I hired a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend to go in and take it down, and with instructions to salvage as much of it as he possibly could. And what I found out late, I came back to my studio and there was kind of just a small pile. I thought, that's all he was able to salvage? I found out afterwards that he had taken the piece all over Brooklyn looking for dumpsters, and every time he saw one, he stopped and shoved some stuff in it, and then went to the next dumpster. So I'm sorry for all the people whose dumpster space I stole, but that just is exactly the problem.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, I am making things that maybe they didn't go directly into the garbage, but you know, they're gonna end up there eventually. There's almost no way around it. Yes.
Yeah, I noticed one of it's like a tail. Was that intention?
Like a what?
The little tail at the end of it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, it was a kind of
Yeah.
yeah. So that, I think that might bring me to my questions. Let's see if it does. Yes, it does. So we can go back to the slides, especially if that's preferable to looking at a black screen. But here I've been busy feeling, I mean, I'm not feeling high and mighty, but certainly feeling like this is bad, and I'm critiquing it, and I want people to know, and then more like, well, how can you not do anything about it? And yet here I am not doing anything about it, really. I'm showing it to a very few number of people, even fewer who will pull some of this out of it. I mean, there's other things to be gotten out of the work. I hope that people get a certain pleasure out of it, you know, and appreciation of beauty, and just, you know, transformation of materials, again, and all of those kinds of things. But at the same time, I now engage in looking for stuff to consume. Okay, it's fine with me that it's been pre-consumed, but now I'm going to consume it, and I'm going to do something temporary with it because it's too big a hassle to make something permanent and store it, just like it's too big a hassle to carry a you know, metal water bottle instead of buying a plastic one when you happen to be thirsty, right? I'm engaging in the exact same behavior as that I'm critiquing, and I'm doing it because it's more convenient, because the materials are seductive, because I'm satisfying all of these desires that I have, but I'm not finding a way around just reiterating what the culture is that I come from. And so that bothers me a lot, but I don't want to stop making stuff, and I don't think I can become unobsessed. That seems to be a given. So that's why I certainly question this. I mean, people will often come up to me and they say, oh, it's so great what you're doing with plastic bottles. Like, but because it feels good to see that they have another life, but nothing is really happening, I don't think.
You know, I see a lot of potential in this,
Oh, good.
especially since in the school systems, they complain that they don't have money for supplies. And I think it would actually be ideal to take some of these things that cannot be recycled and use it within the schools, especially in nursery schools. And the inspiration along with the young children imagination
Yeah,
of what they can do with just a small sampling of putting a number of, let's say 20, 25 items.
right,
Now,
yeah,
what can you do with this?
right, have a challenge, like a
And
little,
the creativity.
a junior project runway or
Because I'm
something.
curious, what inspired you when you're working?
Well, I do just love these materials, and to think that something can happen with them that hasn't happened yet.
Children
Yeah,
would get
I am a
sense.
child, it's true.
Mhm.
One of the other things that I've come across though, and I think most artists who work with repurposed materials, and at this point, that's a lot of artists. I mean, this is not like a niche anymore, this is like all over. But one of the things that you're confronted with when you put together materials that have some other purpose is putting them together almost always requires a new material to incorporate. So whether it's like staples or brads or fishing line or cable ties or glue or, you know, all of these different things, it's not a non-consuming process. I always have to buy stuff. I always try to take a deduction for materials on my tax return. You know,
It's a little expensive.
well, I try to work with really cheap materials. So like I love Elmer's glue, but which is one reason I like working with books, because Elmer's glue works with books. But, you know, in other words, there's not a clean cut, oh, just flip it over and this will happen kind of thing. But I agree, you know, to give kids stuff as building blocks would be fantastic. Yeah, that's a
And
nice
it
idea.
saves money.
Yeah.
Materials.
Yeah.
And it's second use.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of teachers out there that have gotten pretty good at that because there isn't necessarily money for other stuff. Anyway, I'm interested in your comments, reactions, etc. And I also can show you where you can go see work if you want to do that. Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, two thoughts. One, just sort of thinking about the conversation, which I really am thinking about the bottle. I sort of get a lot of joy thinking about the specific bottles you're using, and they've had, you know, there are millions of bottles, and they just go through this process, but what lucky bottles that get to be made into a duck and get this one moment to sort of
Shine.
shine before they get plunged back.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
So my heart goes out to all the very specific
So you
objects
would
that-
vote for bottles having rights as a person, personhood.
The soul of a bottle.
That's
what we're talking
personhood is, but sure, they have
Yeah.
their, you know, God is in the bottles as much as they're.
Well, that's how I
in
feel
us.
about, like, yeah, the material is, this is a valuable material, except that we've decided it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I love trash, so my heart really goes out to it in that regard.
No, that's- I think what I've seen that you've done is given life to something that would have died earlier,
Yeah.
that just would have gone somewhere else, been disposed of in a dump, in a trash heap. And your ideas that have come through and the designs. I mean, some of your sculptures remind me of Chihuly glass sculptures.
Yeah. Yeah,
What is it?
Chihuly.
Chihuly.
yeah,
Get glass sculptures. I think they're just fabulous. And to Myrna's point, wouldn't it be interesting if you could find someone who would be willing to take a sample of a section of, but as a permanent
that would be fantastic.
installation. The other thing that I'm very much interested in is your temperament and your disposition. When you get into these issues with people, like with the school, how did you handle that? How did you feel about what they were doing to you, your
I was furious.
commitment to your work, and just the
No, I was furious, and I was sad
yeah.
because of what it meant about how much people knew.
Right.
You know, those complaints were coming from people who had never gotten to learn about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So there's that. But, it kind of makes me, I get, my ex used to call me a bulldog. I get very tenacious and I'm gonna try and make this thing
Yeah.
work. And so that's one aspect is I find it a challenge. When I'm actually dealing with people, I try to be very polite.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm confrontation avoidant. I think there's a therapeutic term for that. I don't know what it is. But so I will come to a crowd like this and complain away. But if facing like the man, I shrivel up a little bit.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
Truth be told.
I think the work that you're doing is really fabulous.
Thank you so
And very
much.
talented.
Yeah.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
No, I was also, to piggyback on that a little bit, yeah, you talked about sort of obsession, like, seeing roots of these obsessions in your childhood reading and all of this, but then also repeatedly putting yourself at a number of different scales in these situations where you're having to confront whether it's this sort of, global circulation of plastics through like capitalism, or whether it's through a much more local situation where like this guy owns the grasses and raided them. I'm wondering if there's some, I don't exactly know how to land this question, but if there's some sort of, having traced a sort of creative lineage of your work, what the sort of spiritual underpinning of that, like when you keep putting yourself in this situation, what does it mean? Like how do you
Okay, that's a good.
do this?
So, and I thought about this today when I looked at the description of the series of talks here, and that it is about how people bring their spiritual life into their work, faith and works. There's a couple things that go on. I'm kind of battling with like what I feel is right and wrong, and trying to make peace with the parts of me that do wrong things. I'm also, this is not necessarily spiritual, but it is about making life work. I'm prone to depression. And so the more that I can make and build, the less I feel that. So I use it that way for sure, all the time. Other things about it, I have to say, I've had some really positive experiences lately where I found out something did mean something to someone. And then I felt a little bit more at ease about spending my time doing this, because for a lot of my life, I felt like when I'm making art, I'm stealing time from other people. And I haven't totally gotten rid of that. And part of that is just, it's the thing you do that you don't make money at, and it's not caring for other people. So of course it's the thing that has to impose on those two very important things that one does in one's life. I'm losing my train of thought a little bit, but the idea of stealing time from other things. And even though I was a teacher for a very long time, and I felt like I gave a lot in that job, and that's what I loved about that job, or one of the things I loved about that job, I still am like, well, what am I actually doing for the world? So for instance, that's been like a happy thing that has happened recently is I did a piece on the back of the hill where Overlook Hospital is. It was during the pandemic, and it was kind of to honor healthcare workers, and it was a whole series of lungs that were attached to trees in this wooded area behind the hospital, with the idea kind of that trees are the lungs of the world, etc. But there was a woman who came walking down the path as I was finishing installing, and she goes, oh, "Is this art?" And bingo, yes, it is. And she said, "Oh, this makes me feel so much better. I just sat through my husband's 7-hour brain surgery, and to come out here and to see this is exactly what I needed to see. It makes me feel so much better." So, that doesn't happen very often, but that was extremely gratifying and makes me feel a little bit more like it's okay to do this. Even though, I haven't managed to, overturn Congress, which I thought surely would happen, but.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's okay that you do this. I really.
It's okay?
It's
Thank you,
okay.
Frank.
I think everyone would agree.
And it turns out you need to hear that all the time.
Yeah.
You do need to hear it over and over again. And
It's very cool.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can finish up and then chat outside also.
are there questions in the chat?
Oh, no, it doesn't.
Tom online right now, you know.
That's my sweetie.
Did you want to show the last thing?
Yeah, that would be great. So if you're inclined, I do have a show up right now. It just got extended through Easter Sunday, April 9th. And it is at a very nice historic house in Passaic County. It's the Passaic County Cultural and Arts Center on Goffle Road, which is in Hawthorne. It's just north of Patterson. And I was just there, so I thought I took a little bit of video just so that you can see new things that were not necessarily in the slideshow. We'll see if it actually came through and we can show it or not.
When is it open?
Excellent question, thank you. It's open weekends from, I believe, 11 to 5, but if you wanted to go there during the week and got in touch with me, I'd be happy to get it open for you, if that was more convenient.
They didn't get the email with the video yet.
Oh, really?
It might be stuck somewhere in the ether.
Well, maybe I just have to go in person. But it's a lot of, I can tell you what it's about. I've shifted slightly to getting interested in making kind of protective garments. They aren't really garments, you can't really wear them. But the idea is that they're pieces that give you a false sense of protection from the impending doom of climate change, and comment on the way that, why you would need protection. So for instance, I have a chest plate made out of, I cut out all the mineral specimens from a children's encyclopedia, you know, all of those cool rocks that you never see, but like, can't help but look at. And I made this paper chest plate out of all the text from the encyclopedia with the minerals are on them. And it's the whole idea is that here's this thing that is made of paper. It can't possibly protect you from anything at all. But it's made of these things that are desirable and valuable that are all about extraction. And the piece is called In Defense of Extraction, with kind of a double play that you can't defend yourself from all of the harm that all of the extraction we've done in the world is causing. I don't know if you followed that or not, but pictures would have been better than words.
A lot of thought goes into your work, doesn't it? I mean, a lot of, you seem to have a philosophy or an approach to the projects that you do.
Yeah.
You don't just pick up some junk and start putting it together.
No, not
You
usually.
really have,
Sometimes I collect junk,
yeah.
but I don't
I
know
think
how I'm
that's
gonna put it
fascinating.
together. And
Yeah.
then eventually I figure out.
So do you write as well? I mean, do you write write about your pieces?
Well, I do write descriptions of them. That's another thing I've started to do since teaching is I always felt like it was, you know, good art didn't require explanation, and that you should just be able to get it. And it's so clear to me that whatever you get from a piece of art, if you know more about it, you get more from it.
Yeah.
And so now like in this show in Passaic, every single piece has a description of how I came to what I came to, kind of thing. Yeah, Wayne.
Well, I think it was really interesting to see the very old thing from Pratt, you know, because as someone who's seen plenty of work by you, I've always thought your work has to do with, a little bit like the apotheosis of bottles. It's like the populism of little, you know, water bottles, the cardboard things, the pieces of paper.
Mm-hmm.
The Pratt stuff looked really different. It's more like, I don't know, Richard Serra, or just massive, big agglomerations.
Or I was using
of
art
stuff.
materials.
Well, yeah, so I'm sort of wondering, like, if you have a moment or a way of thinking in your life or your art, when you started moving toward many small, not always small, but things where they're individually differentiated and aggregated.
Right.
Compared to like,
Yeah.
There was a moment when that happened.
I mean, I think it mostly happened in graduate school, because when I was at Pratt, I mostly worked in clay. I did a lot of drawing and collage, but I mostly worked in clay. Which, I mean, the way I was building was aggregate, you know, a little bit and add a little bit and add a little bit, but it wasn't that starting with individual things and combining them. And yeah, I really am enjoying that right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
from far away as well as nearby. I really appreciate it. And thank you again for having me.
We'll do the closing and pass the playground. So, thank you very much, Kate. That was beautiful. Very profound. Thank you for sharing all of that about your art, about what inspires you and how you feel, and it was just perfect. Thank you very much. So I think we'll pass the plate around to make a small contribution to our work here. And I guess I'll read a few words. Yes. Hold on to what is good, even if it is a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it is a tree which stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it is a long way from here. Hold on to my hand, even when I have gone away from you. Okay. So, thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Well, we should say that the next Faith and Works is
Yes.
not on a Sunday.
It's a Seder.
It's Wednesday, April 12th.
So last night of Passover.
And it'll be here?
It's gonna be here. We have amazing guests, Rogelio and Rosanna. We're gonna talk about the Faith and Works and who's our community Seder. And Holly and I will work on a little list about like Seder supplies, what people can bring.
Wonderful.
We'll try to share that this week so people can.
Thank you.
start
Great.
preparing.
Any other announcements? Well, okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks so much. Thanks for-
Nice job, Darcy. Thank you.
Thank you.